Welcome again to our October session of BusinessWise Insiders. Before we get started, just a quick overview of what to expect today. First, I will walk everyone through today's presentation, during which I'll ask everyone to remain on mute just to minimize any inadvertent disruptions and keep everything moving smoothly. The presentation should last about 20 or 25 minutes, after which we'll open the session up to a discussion, and you'll have a chance to introduce yourself to our colleagues here and ask questions or offer your own perspective on the ideas we'll cover today. And I would really encourage you to stick around for that piece of it. As Deb mentioned when she was talking about talking with and interacting with other actual human beings, that's really the magic of Insiders. It's a holdover from when we used to gather in person, and it really was about networking and idea sharing as much as it was about presenting on a specific topic. So I hope you'll stick around for that. If you have any questions during the presentation, either write them down and we can talk about it in the discussion session, or try to ask it in the chat window, and we'll see if we can get it to it during the presentation. So with that, let's turn to today's topic. And today we're going to be digging into the question of why should your prospects say yes to you, and look at a step-by-step process that you can use to give prospects a unique and compelling reason to engage with you from the very beginning of the sales process. And when we talk about why prospects should say yes and the idea of a value proposition, we're often focused on the end of the sales process, and we're striving to give prospects a reason to sign on the dotted line and to buy. And we'll touch on that a bit today, but our ultimate focus will really be on the beginning of the process. Instead of the yes that results in a signed contract, we'll look at the yeses that result in conversations and meetings that fill your pipeline with high-value opportunities. And for those early stage decisions your prospects are faced with, we'll explore how you can communicate the unique value they receive in exchange for saying yes. And the question I wanted to start with today is why your unique value matters. Why can't you just talk about your product and its features and hope that there's a need for it on the other side? Think about it this way. Value is at the center of every trade or transaction, including the final purchase of a product or service, but also anytime you ask anyone for anything. And as a B2B sales rep, reaching out to prospects who may not know about you or your product, you ask a lot of your prospect. You ask them to take that first cold call. You ask them to open your email. You ask them to respond to your voicemail or email message. You ask them to spend time on a conversation or in an appointment with you. And of course, you hope ultimately to ask them to buy from you. So why should your prospect ever say yes to any of these requests? And the only reason is that you offer something valuable in return for that yes. And that value is even more powerful when it is unique, when it's different, and when your prospect can't get it anywhere else. So the obvious next question is, how are you valuable and different? And while the question may be obvious, the answer can be really hard to pin down, even for the most successful and smartest sales reps. If you've ever role-played on a cold call or practiced an elevator pitch, you know how much even those smart sales reps can struggle to come up with a concise and compelling answer to the question, what do you do? What do you offer? And this may be especially true of experienced sales reps who know their product inside and out, since the natural tendency is to talk about your prospect's powerful features rather than what problems those features help solve. So it's a good exercise to put yourself in the prospect's shoes and ask the questions from their perspective. What do I get from taking this call? What do I get from opening this email? What do I get from responding to this message, from a conversation with this person, from a meeting with this person? And ultimately, what do I get from this product or service? Now think of your current cold outreach strategy and the various ways you ask your clients the questions from the previous slide. Would you say yes to any of these requests? If you were them, do you get something valuable in return for it? And before we dig in a little deeper, I just wanted to ask Deborah if she had any introductory remarks on the concept of value proposition and value statements.
I think that this is something that doesn't come easy for any of us. And part of the reason is that we're so steeped in what we do that it seems so obvious to us. But none of those things, or few of those things, are obvious to our prospects. So I really encourage you throughout this presentation to take some of these questions back to your colleagues and really brainstorm and think about it, not only from your point of view, but as Sam says, from the point of view of your prospects.
Thanks, Deb. And as I mentioned, our focus today will largely be on all the questions leading up to the big one at the end. Why should I buy from you? But let's take a step back for a second and spend some time with that last big question and see how it can serve as a roadmap for how we approach the smaller questions that lead up to that point. So step one in the process of identifying and communicating your unique value is to go through this exercise of answering the big question. Your answer is often called your value proposition or your value statement, and we're going to look at how to build one. So let's start with something very simple. It's something called the value proposition equation, and it comes from a framework developed by Steve Blank of Lean Startup. And it's a common element of a lot of online literature related to value propositions. And the reason it's a great starting point is that it's going to help us define the three critical variables in any effective value proposition. So every business should be able to fill in the blanks in the following equation. We help X do Y by doing Z. And X represents your ideal prospects, the ones who stand to benefit most from what you offer. Y represents what you help them do, the obstacles you help them overcome, the priorities you help them address, and the challenges and opportunities you help them prepare for. And then finally, Z represents how you help your prospects achieve those goals. So whether it's a unique way of solving a common problem, or just the fact that you offer a premium product or low-cost solution, Z is what makes your approach different and better than your competitors. And I like starting here because it's straightforward and simple, yet it highlights these critical building blocks of any successful value proposition. But there's a big problem with the value proposition equation, and that's that it's more about you than it is about your prospects. Just like Deb was talking about, we're so steeped in our product and how it helps our prospects in certain ways that we forget that that stuff doesn't really matter to your prospects. The value proposition equation is oriented toward what you do and how you do it more than it is about how your prospect benefits and why they should even care. Fortunately, there's an easy way to flip it around, and it's called the value proposition question. And this one comes from Flint McLaughlin and Mech Labs, which is an organization that's been around for years and that performs in-depth and really insightful research into the science of marketing. And several years ago, Dr. McLaughlin came up with what he called the value proposition question, which is designed to help you define and communicate your unique value in a way that actually matters to and resonates with your prospects. So like the value proposition equation, it has three components, and I'm going to spend some time breaking them down just to put a finer point on the importance of the building blocks we've just talked about. And those three components are: if I am your ideal prospect, why should I say yes to you rather than to your competitors? So let's start with the first piece, if I am your ideal prospect. Now, at BusinessWise, we're firm believers in the importance of a defined and focused target market, not just because it's the best way to generate higher value leads, because just as your core business offering will help define your target market, defining your audience also helps you sharpen what you offer and how you communicate that. When you speak to a specific group of prospects with specific problems and priorities that you are uniquely positioned to address, your message will become much more effective in communicating the value that your company, product, or service provides to your customers. So this first step of identifying who you help and targeting them with your message is a great way to set yourself up to communicate it more effectively. So that's part one. So let's look at part two. Why should I buy from you? And this is really where the value comes in the value proposition. The critical piece to emphasize here is that you don't define your value, because the value isn't about you. It's about your prospects and your customers. They define value in terms of their own problems and priorities. And when they perceive value that meets their definition, they will act. And if there's a common mistake that sales reps and marketers can't seem to avoid, it's that they talk about their own experiences, products, and services rather than the experiences, wants, and needs of their prospects. So we like to use the question, what's in it for me, to help reframe these same ideas in a way that conveys value to your prospect. And in many cases, it's as simple as forcing yourself to communicate in the second person, using you rather than we or I. Don't communicate in terms of what you offer, communicate in terms of how your prospect benefits. So consider this in the context of setting a first appointment. When a prospect seems uncertain about why or if they should meet with you, it's not we're the experts on new business development, it's you get new ideas on how to solve the challenges of a poor prospect pipeline. It's not we have the best prospecting data, it's you'll discover how using locally researched contact data can give you a big leg up on the competition. Same idea, reframed slightly in a way that will speak to and resonate with your prospects more effectively. And now let's look at part 3. So if you stopped here and just answered the question, if I am your ideal prospect, why should I buy from you? You might think you've done a pretty good job of defining your why, but you'd be missing this critical piece. Because value alone won't get you much business if your prospects can get that same value from somewhere else. An easy way to double check the power of your value proposition is to ask whether your competitors can say the same thing. And sometimes industry standard features are expected if you work in a more commoditized industry, and there are therefore a cost of entry, but there needs to be unique value on top of those standard expectations, and your answer needs to include those for it to be really compelling. And I'm just going to finish this section by returning to those 3 basic building blocks. So both the value proposition equation and the value proposition question are designed to get you to focus on the who, the what, and the how of your business and what you offer, but they look at it from different angles. The value proposition equation starts by asking you to define them, and the value proposition question takes it a step further by helping you communicate those elements in a way that actually resonates with your prospect. But remember, this is just our starting point today. And in a moment, we're going to dive deeper into how we can use these building blocks, reorient them, put a finer point on them, and adapt the value proposition for the beginning of the sales process. But before I do that, Deborah, do you have any additional thoughts at this point?
I was thinking about the concept of uniqueness. And I think it's important to remember that even though most of us think about unique as something that our competitors can't offer, uniqueness can come in different varieties. And so it might be, how are you more trustworthy? Do you have more expertise? Can you make your prospects feel more comfortable? And there are all sorts of different ways to think about the idea of uniqueness, because it's a challenge in this somewhat commoditized world.
Exactly. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but that uniqueness can really be delivered by your uniqueness as a sales rep rather than your uniqueness of the uniqueness of your offer in the marketplace. You have insights and experiences that are different than anyone else. And at this point in the sales process, that can really make the difference between you and a competitor. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Okay, so we've covered the big question, and hopefully you've started thinking about ways your company and product or service offers unique value to your prospects and customers. But now I'm going to ask you to stop thinking about why your prospects should buy from you. That question isn't even in your prospects' minds when you reach out to them with a cold call or cold email looking to start a conversation or set an appointment. So put another way, answering the big question is an important exercise, but as a sales rep looking to fill our pipelines with early stage opportunities, our focus needs to be on answering the small questions. So going back to the slide from the beginning of the presentation, these small questions come much earlier in the sales process and represent critical hurdles in the effort to create prospect engagements that turn into leads and sales. And the answer to each question, as well as dozens of other similar questions that arise throughout the process, represents its own mini value proposition that gives your prospect a reason to act. So here's one way to think about it. You should have an umbrella value proposition that encompasses your essential answer to the question of why should prospects do business with you rather than your competitors. That umbrella value prop is your guidepost for the top line goals that you help customers achieve, and it's a helpful thing to keep in mind at every stage of the process. In contrast, your mini value propositions fit underneath that umbrella. While they may not explicitly mention your product or service, they're all related since they get at the fundamental way that you help prospects and customers achieve their goals and address their priorities. And in fact, you can modify the value proposition question to help you customize your core value proposition for any scenario or step along the path to an appointment. So rather than using the verbiage in the big value proposition question, try this. If I am a specific prospect, why should I take this action rather than some other action? So an example might be, if I am a prospect who doesn't know about you, why should I take your call rather than hang up? If I'm a prospect who doesn't know about you, why should I reply to your email rather than delete it? If I'm a prospect you've already spoken with, why should I agree to a meeting rather than explore other options? Or if I'm a prospect in a specific industry, why should I attend your event rather than pass up the invitation? And it's sort of like business development Mad Libs with countless combinations based on the prospect action and unique benefit. And here's another way to visualize why these mini value propositions are so important. If you think of the sales process as a mountain that you need to help your prospect climb, where the sale is at the summit, as the prospect gradually ascends that mountain, he or she needs a reason to keep climbing, and your mini value propositions are sort of the rope that keeps them there. At every level of the prospect's climb, the perceived value of taking the next step must outweigh the cost, or they'll fall off. And I wanted to give a couple of examples of how this might work in specific approaches to cold prospecting. So this is an example of a cold call script that we use to ensure we're focused on offering value in exchange for an appointment. We use the acronym TRICK, which stands for the reason I'm calling. And the idea behind TRICK is twofold. It helps you remember to be direct and get to the point, and it ensures that your call has a purpose that both you and your prospect are clear on. And you can see that the offer of value in this example comes before the request for a meeting, because the prospect sees no value in meeting. They have no reason to give you their time. And then it works the same way with email, and we're big believers in getting to the point. We found that emails that ask what you want of your prospect in the first 2 to 3 sentences get a lot more responses. And sentences like these are great ways to lead directly into your offer or request, so your prospect immediately understands what you want him or her to do, and they can decide whether to do it. So I'm writing to ask you for 15 minutes of your time to discuss ideas for new business development, or I'd like to connect about upcoming events that might open more doors for you and your team. Or are you open to a 15-minute call to discuss steps other firms in your industry are taking to adapt to the current landscape? And if you haven't already gathered, this is really hard. So I wanted to close out this section with a quote about the tension we face as we attempt to communicate our value in a way that prospects will care about. This is from a blog about cold email prospecting, and the quote here is, "We need to write a little about ourselves and our offer, and at the same time keep our focus on the addressee." In other words, we should write about ourselves while still writing about them. In other words, the challenge is to tell your prospects about you by talking about them. So in cold prospecting, your value proposition hints at your unique insights and perspectives. That's the value that you're offering, but it frames those insights in terms of how your prospect benefits. And the distinction here is giving versus getting. When your prospects are thinking about what they get rather than what you give, your value proposition becomes much more compelling. Deborah, did you have anything here?
Yes, I think we see a lot of companies spending valuable time on that top of the mountain part of the process. The part between the meeting and getting the prospects to say yes to the sale, because most everybody knows the value of what you're offering, or at least you have a pretty good percentage of closures once you get that meeting. We see much less attention toward the bottom of the mountain parts. So getting that first appointment is a real challenge. And we're really here to help you with that lower level part to improve how to get up that bottom part of the mountain.
Thanks, Deb. So that brings us to step 3, which is where the most successful sales reps separate themselves from the pack. So we've talked about the big umbrella value proposition that sort of defines what your business does, how it helps prospects achieve their priorities and address their problems in a unique way. And we've talked about how you can adapt that to various early stage scenarios to, as Deb suggested, offer value in exchange for a cold call or an email reply or a meeting that are just as compelling as that big value proposition. But now we're going to look at the ways that individual sales reps can offer that value in any sales context. So think about, again, the many things you ask of your prospect. Today, we've divided them into 2 groups: the destination, the big question of why customers buy, and the journey, all the smaller questions that pop up along the way. So now ask yourself, what separates the small questions from the big question? Is it just a matter of where they occur in the process? And the hint here is to think about where the value comes from in each situation. So with a big question, the value comes in significant part from your product or service. But that's not the case with any of the smaller questions because they haven't bought it yet. So for all the small questions, the value really comes from you, the sales rep. So what unique value do you as the sales rep provide? And it's, again, a hard question to answer. But think about this. What would your sales process look without you? Would it be the exact same? Can your prospect do all the things you're asking them to do just by visiting your website? Or do they get an expert, a partner, someone who helps put the decisions they face in the context of what matters to the future of their business success? So ask yourself, what do I know that my prospect doesn't? What do I know that will change my prospect's perspective on their own business and shape their future decisions? And I've got 2 sets of questions that I think are really great ways to tap into that reservoir of knowledge that almost every sales rep already has. The first one here is, what has changed in your prospect industry over the past 1, 3, or 5 years? Is there new technology emerging in your prospects industry? And what stories can you tell about how you've helped clients navigate technological transitions in the past? Are there new barriers to success in the industry? What are you seeing with your current clients in that regard? And then where are the trends pointing? And what does that mean for achieving success in the future? This is all stuff that you likely already know because you already work with clients in this industry. And you know on a much more broad level what's coming down the road, what challenges prospects are likely to face than maybe they do from their sort of siloed perspective. And then ask the same question, but this time for your industry. What has changed in your industry over the past 1, 3, or 5 years that your prospect might not know about? Is there new technology that you're using to help clients that your prospect would never know about? An example from our own experience might be the advent of automated email prospecting campaigns that lead to more consistent and successful email lead gen with less effort on the part of our clients. This is something that we couldn't have offered 10 years ago, but we do now to several clients. And it's something that we know about that they didn't, and we brought it to their attention. Again, what obstacles are emerging and how are you advising clients to overcome them? What's easier? What's harder? How is the industry adapting? And then finally, one of my favorite questions, if you couldn't offer your product, how would you help your prospect? So what information, what ideas can you convey that would lead to better decisions on their part? And then I just want to conclude here by sharing a couple of quotes from some of our favorite resources of sales knowledge and expertise. And these quotes are going to reinforce the all-important concept of offering unique value as a sales rep. And the first expert is Anthony Iannarino, who we quote often, and whose website, The Sales Blog, is full of really great, excellent practical advice about how to successfully navigate today's selling landscape. So in a recent blog post, he wrote, if your cold call provides neither value nor the promise of value, no client will make space on their calendar. And this quote really crystallizes the issue because it emphasizes that it's a transaction. If I don't get something, value, I'm not going to go out of my way to give you something, time on my calendar. So you might be asking yourself, well, shouldn't I just ask questions and listen on a cold call? And Iannarino writes that in the face of asking questions, that in fact, asking questions offers proof that you are not a value proposition because it means you're asking more of your prospect in return for what? So how should you provide value? He writes, you should be part catalyst, part instigator, part agitator, and part prophet. So it's not really even your knowledge itself that's the value proposition, it's how that knowledge helps change perspective and create action. And then according to Iannarino, that's really your ultimate goal, to teach your client what factors to consider and how to weight them, and then exploring change to define their future potential. And then just one more before we wrap up, and this one's from a white paper by the RAIN Group, which is a sales training organization in Massachusetts. And they write that today's sales winners go beyond uncovering buyer needs and matching their products and services as solutions to buyer problems. And this gets right at the question from that last slide about why sales reps can no longer just ask questions to discover pain and then sell a solution. And the quotes here on the right are almost a perfect summary of what we've covered today. Sales reps provide valuable ideas and insights during the sales process. They redefine buyer needs by way of those ideas and insights. And then the sellers themselves become the value. And this is exactly what today's buyers are looking for. Deborah, did you have any conclusion remarks before we break up into the discussion?
I'm looking forward to hearing what our participants see as some examples of these value propositions and feedback in terms of what resonates and what doesn't. So let's just move on.
Great. Well, thanks everybody again for attending, and I hope you stick around for the breakout session.